basically trying to stay informed. The Israelis went in July, August 2006, inflicted massive death and destruction, killed about 1,200 Lebanese. Of the 1,200, approximately 1,000 were civilians, inflicted massive destruction of the civilian infrastructure. The bridges were systematically destroyed in Lebanon and so forth. But on the battlefield, Israel suffered another defeat at the hands of the party of God, the Hezbollah. And now the Israelis were extremely upset. It was 2 consecutive defeats. And Mr. Nasrallah, Sayed Nasrallah, the head of the Hezbollah, he wasn't shy about rubbing it into the faces of the Israelis about the defeat they suffered and what he called the divine victory. And so he kept saying to the Israelis, we're not afraid of you anymore. You want to attack? Attack. And if you attack again, we'll defeat you again. Well, the Israelis needed to restore their deterrence capacity. The Arab world's fear of them. They couldn't yet do it in Lebanon because in Lebanon they weren't certain that they would come out better than they did in rounds 1 and 2. They then thought about attacking Iran, but the United States vetoed that idea. And so they turned to their favorite shooting gallery, namely Gaza. And they decided in Gaza they were going to restore their deterrence capacity, the Arab world's fear of them. But they had one problem in Gaza. The problem was everybody knew that Hamas wasn't much of a fighting force. So how do you restore your deterrence capacity against a foe which wasn't a significant fighting force to begin with? It's not going to impress anyone to inflict a battlefield victory on Hamas. And so what Israel decided to do was that it was going to inflict so much death and destruction, so much murder and mayhem in Gaza, that it would transmit the message to the rest of the Arab Muslim world. But don't mess with us, because if you mess with us, we're not talking anymore about fighting wars on the battlefield. We're going to just destroy everything in sight. That was their, so to speak, battle plan. The background is fairly straightforward, not really very controversial, at least among human rights organizations, mainstream human rights organizations, and humanitarian organizations. In January 2006, there were parliamentary elections in the occupied Palestinian territories. Unexpectedly, Hamas, the Islamic movement, it emerged victorious. Former President Jimmy Carter, he was one of the independent observers for these elections, and he called them completely honest and fair. The reaction of the Americans and the Israelis to these completely honest and fair elections was to impose economic sanctions on the people of Gaza, to punish them for having elected the wrong government into power. About a year and a half later, the United States, Israel, and some elements among the Palestinians, they attempted a coup to overthrow the legally elected government. Hamas foiled the coup. The Palestinian elements fled to the West Bank. And now the United States and Israel, they tightened the blockade of Gaza, a blockade which Amnesty International called a flagrant violation of international law, a blockade which the Goldstone Mission later called a possible crime against humanity. The The former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, MarylaHusyt, she journeyed to Gaza at this time, and she said, now I'm quoting her, "Gaza's whole civilization has been destroyed." I'm not exaggerating. Its whole civilization has been destroyed. In June 2008, Egypt brokered a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel. And under the terms of the ceasefire, each side had obligations. Hamas, it had to stop its rocket and mortar attacks on Israel. And Israel, it had to gradually lift the blockade of Gaza. The blockade which is a flagrant violation of international law. The blockade which was destroying the civilization. Well, according to the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Hamas, and now I'm quoting the Israeli ministry, was careful to maintain the ceasefire. Hamas is careful to maintain the ceasefire. But Israel reneged on its obligation to gradually lift the blockade of Gaza. Actually, one of the useful things that came out of the WikiLeaks was a cable from the American representatives meeting with the Israelis on November 3rd. And in the cable, the American representatives said that on multiple occasions, the Israelis told the Americans that we're going to bring the economy of Gaza to the brink of collapse. Now bear in mind, while they were informing the Americans privately that they were going to bring the economy of Gaza to the brink of collapse, formally and publicly, they had agreed to gradually lift the blockade of Gaza. What happened next? Not particularly controversial. All you have to do is open up Amnesty International's yearbook for 2009, go to the entry for Israel and the occupied territories, and you'll read this. A ceasefire agreed in June between Israel and Palestinian armed groups in Gaza. It held for 4.5 months, but it broke down after Israeli forces killed 6 Palestinian militants in airstrikes and other attacks on 4 November. Already by March 2007, Israel was preparing for its invasion of Gaza. Once all the pieces were in place, it needed an excuse. It needed a pretext. It needed an alibi. And so it patiently waited. And it waited until November 4th, the US election day. And on November 4th, knowing that the attention of the